I'm Diane Kay, and the author of this book, Divorce: An Exit Plan from Hell, A Guide for Women. Divorce is so traumatic and so difficult, and there's so many sides, and we're the first divorce workshop for women. Many, many times in divorce we feel we're all alone. Now there are resources available. Hopefully this will help someone in the process of going through a divorce to know that there are services available, there are resources available to help assist through this process. If you buy a car, you have insurance. If you have a house, you have insurance. Going through divorce, the only insurance that you have, and it's not really insurance, is preparation. Financial implications, the legal implications, the emotional implications, but the main thing to know is that you're not alone in this process, even though you may feel that way, that you're not alone. It's almost like breaking the myth. It's breaking the myth, the white picket fence, the 2 kids, the house, the car, the dog, that type of thing. And that's wonderful, but unfortunately life doesn't always go that way for us. With women, we have to be prepared in this life. And again, it doesn't have to be divorce, it could be death. So we must be prepared, even if we love our spouses and this thing and that thing, just stay prepared. Because in the end, it may be you and your children.
I was married for 9 years. Been divorced since 2009. I think I got divorced because we were married for the wrong reason. My wife married me for the wrong reason. Shocking at the beginning, and then I thought about it, and it could be on a two-way street. I could have married her for the wrong reason, but I didn't. But I know she married me for the wrong reason after I thought about it. At the beginning it was difficult, but you have to move on. So it was pretty serious at the beginning. I've learned that you need to wait and get to know somebody, not that I didn't wait for her, but you really need to look at the situation a little clearer, before you make that big step to get married. Get counseling. First, by someone that's been married many years maybe, someone that neither one of you will know. That would help a lot. Take some trips together and get to understand each other on different levels, different situations, different seasons. Makes a big difference too. And understand all your finances and all that stuff before you get married. Make sure this person owns this or is in this amount of debt and all that kind of stuff before you get married. That helps a lot, because you can get into a marriage and sometimes, you'd be surprised by some of the things you find out after you've been married. Once you separate, of course your income is like half. If you're dependent on 2 incomes or just one, it could be a problem, if you're not prepared to live by yourself. You should do that anyway. Once you get married, you should be married for life. I learned my lesson, but I'm a better person now.
One night my ex-husband came home from work and he told me he had gotten a new phone. It was voice activated since he had a visual impairment, and I said, that's wonderful. I'm so glad that they have, that for you. And he said that, no, you don't understand. He said, I have my own phone now, that we no longer have a joint account together. That pretty much let me know that he was definitely separating himself from me permanently. My lawyer wanted to subpoena his phone calls for 60 days and look at the phone records after 60 days, which he did. Come to find out, there was several hundreds of phone calls in 60 days between him and somebody else. So I knew then why the new phone was bought. I was fixing dinner one night, and he had brought up that if I wanted to go back to work full time, just feel free to do it. And I just felt that was awfully strange, for him just to bring up all of a sudden for me to, feel free to go back to work full time. When you look back on it, you notice things that are said like this, you might realize what's coming on, but I didn't. But I know now when he brought that up, he wanted me to be out of the house. He wanted me to be away. He was very involved with his work, with the company he had worked with for years, but then he started getting involved with boards and organizations, and, at times I went with him, but it got to the place more to where he was going with other people and traveling more. I didn't see him as much. Our time together wasn't near what it should have been. Women should realize that when things like this start happening, they have to be guarded, and they have to understand that something might be going on. Even though you're married for 30 years doesn't mean that your marriage is perfect.
Some of the things that I think are advisable when trying to get through this process, which is often difficult, is to maintain a sense of personal identity. I think that it's important to keep yourself healthy. I think it's important to do that in many ways. Exercise, which was my love. I love physical activity. Getting involved in perhaps a book club and being involved with your church, which is something also that is very dear to me. Being involved with other friends who are supportive, and again, finding your own place and maintaining that and nurturing that, because particularly when you have children, if you are not healthy, you can't give that to them. And you have to know when to let go of things that you can't control. And in the case of divorce, there are many, many things that you usually can't control. In spite of the fact that we may trust our husbands, or we may feel that it's okay to entrust them with all of the knowledge of the financial information, I think it's a wise idea to prepare not only for a situation which may lead to divorce, but in any life-changing situation such as trauma, that we as women be responsible for knowing what is going on in our personal financial lives. Keep track of all information regarding anything financial, anything that could have any kind of bearing on you, the welfare of your children, and your future. It is wise, I think, to make sure that you have something in your own life that you can perhaps fall back on should you have a situation where you find yourself without financial support for any reason. So take care of yourself first so that you can take care of others around you.
What is legal separation? Is it just one person leaving the home and not coming back?
There's a lot of myths surrounding what a legal separation is. A lot of people think that if one person leaves the home and doesn't come back, that they're automatically legally separated. But that's not actually true. In Missouri, a legal separation is almost identical to a divorce. In other words, the decisions that have to be made in any divorce also have to be made in a legal separation. So basically, they need to decide how they're going to divide their assets and liabilities, how they're going to parent their children, and how they're financially going to take care of their children and take care of themselves. Debt is also a dispute in divorce. If you look at the Missouri statutes, it says that the court is to divide the assets and liabilities equitably. A lot of people have a myth that everything's supposed to be divided 50-50, but we do not live in a community property state. This is an equitable property state. And equity has lots of different meanings. Sometimes it is 50-50, sometimes it's not. But in this day and age, a lot of people are in the red. The sum total of their assets and liabilities is a negative balance sheet. And it's a really, really sad situation dealing with that kind of dynamic, because a lot of people can't afford to get divorced, but they're wanting to get divorced anyway. You have the issue of bankruptcy. And how does that affect a divorce, and how does that affect each individual spouse? And that's where people really do need to have legal counsel, because that has grave consequences for both of them. So all those decisions get decided in a divorce, and they also get decided in a legal separation. The difference is that in a divorce, the marriage is considered irretrievably broken. Those are the buzzwords right out of the statute, and that the marriage cannot be preserved. So it's considered a severing of the marriage. In a legal separation, the marriage is in distress, but not irretrievably broken. The marriage has some hope of being preserved. Kind of a limbo state, because even though you make all the decisions the same as that you do in a divorce, you're not actually divorced. The only thing you can't do is remarry. So if someone wants to remarry, if someone wants to convert the legal separation to a divorce, then they have another court process, usually a very simple court process, to convert the legal separation to a divorce.
What can I do to make sure that my son's routine stays intact? Lately, every time he comes back from his father's visits, I have to deprogram him, and I don't know how to communicate to my ex that we need to stay up with the routine, such as like bedtime, eating habits, doing homework after school.
My feeling on that is to have it specified in your decree, as far as who gets the child when. If the spouse is getting a child on Wednesdays and he's supposed to be back by 7 o'clock, I would have that enforced and make sure the spouse is on the same page with that, so they can keep their routine the same. It's not an easy job to do that, because you're splitting the child in two almost. He's staying with the husband and the wife. So if you have it in your decree, the husband gets the child on Mondays and Wednesdays, that's fine, but he should be back by 7 o'clock, not 9 o'clock. And again, that has to come from your decree, because you just can't say have him back by 8 or 9 o'clock when your decree says have him back by a different time. But again, that's something that should be done when you get the divorce, rather than the parents trying to work that out, because a lot of times at that point they can't work it out. So if you have it in your divorce decree, it's much easier to keep the child on a balance and keep the child on a routine.
Missouri, like many other states, requires that if children are involved, that there be a parenting plan. And the Missouri statutes actually spell out in great detail all the things that need to be in it, when the kids are with each of the parents, during weekends and weekdays, during holidays, during vacations. And most parenting plans really are spelled out with time arrangements, just as you were talking about. I think before you even get to that, there's a more important issue that needs to be addressed. And this is, how do parents talk about parenting? Because things are going to change when you're living in two households. Things cannot be exactly the same. Routines are going to change, because now your child has a home with their mom and they have a home with their dad. And mom is going to do things a little bit differently, and dad's going to do things a little bit differently. And that happens whether you stay married or whether you get divorced. So I think what's really helpful for parents is, quite frankly, to take them out of an adversarial setting, or hopefully they never even get into an adversarial setting, and sit down and try to have a realistic discussion of what's their kid like? What does their kid need? How is it going to work going back and forth? What's it like for their child going back and forth between the households? How do they want to parent their kid? What are their goals and expectations? When their kids in their 30s participating in a research survey of what it's like to grow up with divorced parents, what do they want their child to be saying? What do they need to do now to set the stage so that their child can grow up healthy and happy and productive and the great adult that they all hope that they'll be? And I think those kinds of conversations can happen. I see them happen every day in my office. I think it's very hard to have those conversations in an adversarial setting, because the adversarial setting pits people against each other. And people don't sit down at the same table and have conversations. But if they're participating with a mediator who can help them have the conversation, if they're participating in a collaborative process where they have attorneys who are helping them work together and having coaches helping them work these things out, people can have great results with parenting, and children do not have to be damaged as a result of a divorce.
What exactly is a default divorce? I've been waiting for my husband to go to the parenting classes, which was told us the previous step before reaching the judge, and I don't know what to do. So what is my next step from here?
A default divorce is when one person the petition for divorce and the other person doesn't show up. Maybe they get served a summons with a copy of that petition for divorce and they don't file a response with the court, or they don't get an attorney and they don't show up. Then basically what happens is the person who requested the divorce goes to court and asks the court to grant the divorce, and the court grants it by default, meaning that the other person who has not responded, who has not showed up, is in default, and the divorce can go forward without them. Here's what people don't know, is that if your now former spouse gets a certified copy of the divorce decree from the court, the first thing they're likely to do is get an attorney and say, "Help me out." And the next thing the attorney is going to do is file a motion to set that decree aside. And most judges will set that decree aside, particularly if it happens within 30 days, but even if it happens longer than that. The courts are likely to set the decree aside because they really want this done right. And done right means that both people need to be involved.
During or after divorce, is seeking family counseling for yourself and your children always a good idea? If professional counseling isn't feasible, what other options or activities can serve as therapy?
In order to maintain mental and physical health throughout the process of divorce, I think it's important to get involved and stay active. Get involved with support groups at church. Exercise is very important for both your mental and emotional health. And just make sure and maintain some stability in your life so you're able to keep going throughout this process, which often can take a very long time. I think it's important to talk through your feelings with a professional, somebody who can step outside the situation and have a different perspective.
And I have to agree with that as well. I think most everybody could use some counseling, even the people who think they're finished with it.
They don't know.
Right, because the other part of, not only are you processing through the divorce and dealing with your grief through the divorce, but you also want to learn, how did this get off track? How did we get to this point? What is my contribution to the demise of the marriage? That as well. How did I contribute to the divorce? How did I get where I am? What am I learning from this so that when I start dating again, I'm not going to get into the same problems? I mean, there'll be some new problems. But how is it that I can learn from this experience to help me down the road? There are not only great church resources and pastoral counseling and church support groups, but there's also structured agencies that offer counseling to people and offer information. And one example is Kids in the Middle, that operates in the whole metro area, including in St. Charles County, that they're on a sliding scale basis, which is really helpful because not everybody can afford professional counseling. So if you can go to a program like that, they do great work with parents as well as with kids. And sometimes universities that have counseling programs, like I know at St. Louis University, there's marriage and family therapy program, a graduate program that has students who are doing counseling, and they do really, really good work because they want to do good work and they're very helpful. So that's another resource for people who are financially strapped.
Also the schools, your children's schools, they may be able to direct you to different agencies and support groups.
How do I seek help or get resources if I'm feeling threatened or in danger? How can I protect myself, children, and finances if I'm feeling threatened by aggression or acts of violence?
Okay, I think a restraining order, if your spouse is harassing you or you feel threatened or insecure, I think it's extremely helpful to have an order of protection or a restraining order. There have been many cases and right here locally where people have had restraining orders, and sometimes the spouse comes after them anyway. But if you don't have it, and he's knocking at your door yelling and screaming, you need it. I think it's an absolute necessity. Yeah.
If you're feeling threatened, there's no reason you shouldn't have one, especially if there's children involved.
It depends on a lot of things. Definitely if you have been threatened, definitely if you fear for your life, definitely if you think your children in danger, definitely if there's a history of violence during the marriage, I think an order of protection is something that can be helpful. There's no guarantee that it's going to help, though.
That's true, too.
We all know there's enough cases that we're all familiar with because they always make the media that people have had an order of protection in place and they've been killed anyway. You're at the highest level of risk for homicide when you're trying to exit a marriage. And that is really scary when you think about it. The highest, particularly if there has been a history of abuse and a history of particularly physical abuse and a history of violence during the marriage. When you try to exit a marriage, you are in really, really high danger. And you can seek an order of protection, you may get an order of protection, and it may not do a hill of beans for keeping you safe. I think while an order of protection can be helpful for many, many people, I have seen this in many, many situations, people cry foul. And I'm just going to go get an order of protection as a means of getting someone else out of the house because the tension in the house is too great. And so they go and file a request for an order of protection. And really what needs to happen is just an informal separation. So I think if you think you need one because you truly are in fear for your life and you really are worried that you're going to be physically abused, I think it's appropriate. I think the parallel with that is to get some help. Get some help from a therapist, get some help from a domestic abuse shelter, get some help from people in the field who know how to work with this dynamic.
Are there any financial indicators I should look out for that can let me know that my spouse is headed for divorce?
Keep track of the finances. Money starts disappearing from either a savings account, checking account, retirement funds, IRAs. You have to start checking those things because a lot of times two signatures aren't needed on this and you're just trusting your spouse. So you have to, it's a must, check your finances and make sure that the money is there and not just take his or her word for it.
If there's anything out of the ordinary, if you had passwords to get into the bank accounts and now your passwords don't work anymore,
That's a good one.
if your spouse has changed jobs and is putting the money into a different bank account instead of a joint bank account, that might be a clue. If you're starting to have different kind of conversations with your spouse. In other words, at the dinner table, the conversations are not the same. Or if someone is showing a different pattern in behavior, they're not coming home at the same time, they're working later at the office. Just anything out of the normal routine that doesn't make sense, that when you try to talk about it, you can't seem to have a conversation that gives you a straight answer.
Another piece to that, and I think is a big piece, and I hear more and more, the spouses, the husbands want to refinance the house. And what they're doing is trying to get walking money. And I happen to know of a woman personally who her husband did this, refinanced the house, and she couldn't understand why he wanted to refinance the house. He was trying to get walking money to leave. So he had her sign to refinance the house for, oh God, a lot of money. And he left. So things like that I would be very reluctant to sign off on.
Be it by death or divorce, all marriages come to an end. What steps can I take to ensure I maintain my financial independence when the marriage ends?
Even though you're at home and your husband has told you to stay at home, you have to keep your skills sharp. Be it divorce or death, You never know what's going to happen in this life. And becoming financially independent, knowing where the money is going, even if he's paying the bills, keeping a record of that. You should be able to trust your spouse, but with the statistics on divorce and the high rate, you have to know where the money's going, because if and when he leaves, you have young children, you need to know what to do. Divorce and Exit Plan from Hell, a guide for women. We're the first divorce workshop for women. I liken this to flying on a plane. Person will come on and say, put your oxygen mask on. Women, put your oxygen mask on yourself. You can't help your children if you can't help yourself. So we must be prepared as women.